And we'll get going. Hey, thanks everyone for being here tonight. My name is Jon Griffith. I'm a curriculum developer with the Series Center for Education, Engagement, and Evaluation at CU Boulder. So my job is to work with scientists at NOAA and CU Boulder and bring their research into classrooms by developing resources. I'm a former eighth grade science teacher and climate scientist. So I've had my feet in both of these different spaces. And so I hope that that allows me to translate these resources, this science in ways that are accessible. When I'm writing my resources, I'm always thinking about how would I do it in my classroom. And so hopefully some of that lands with you here tonight. I was mentioning to Amy earlier this evening that this is the first time I'm trying a new approach. Typically in the past, what I've done is I've talked about the data puzzles instructional framework in the context of one of our 12, 13, or 14 lessons. I'm not sure how many we have right now. But tonight, we're not going to dive as much into the instructional framework, but instead into a few strategies that we've added to a particular lesson called the tipping point. I'm currently in the process with other team members tonight. I'm a talking head for a hugely collaborative team, but we're in the process of adding different data sense making strategies to our lessons. And so what we're going to do over the coming year is highlight some of these different strategies that we've embedded into data puzzle lessons, and hope that they leave you inspired to either try the strategies in the lessons that we have, or try the strategies in another data set that you're bringing into your classroom. With that, I'd also like to say for those of you that are new to data puzzles, welcome. Data puzzles have been around for a number of years, but we continue to revamp them and try to make them as accessible and helpful to teachers as possible. So often if you're in a lesson, you might see me in there like, oh, I got some feedback from this teacher. I can change it kind of on the fly, but they're 3, 4 day lessons, so 180 plus minutes. Um, where we've taken classroom friendly data sets and combined them with ambitious science teaching practices to help support students make sense of phenomena, and they're typically climate phenomena. And so the development team is quite vast. Myself and Dr. Melissa Bratton, who is at CU Boulder and is a co-author of the Ambitious Science teaching book, helped develop this instructional framework. I'm fortunate to have access to almost 800 earth scientists at CU Boulder and NOAA, and so work closely with them to take their research and put it into resources like those you'll see tonight. And then have been very, very fortunate to get to partner with folks that specialize in working with teachers and students to make sense of data, that being Kristen Hunter Thompson and Annette Brickley of DataSpire, and Dr. Jessica Bean at University of California, Berkeley. So a hugely collaborative group of people from across the country. And then can't do it without teachers like you, Randy, who's on this call. Many other teachers that we've worked with in the past have actually helped write these lessons. And we have pilot tested them and continue to receive feedback over the years. And every piece of feedback we read, and we try to be proactive about how we can improve these lessons to meet the needs of teachers like yourselves and your students. Pictured here is our first cohort of 19 middle school science teachers from the Colorado Front Range. We received quite a large grant from the National Science Foundation to work with middle school science teachers to facilitate a professional learning experience in the context of data puzzle lessons, where we're trying to boost their confidence to make sense of data, to use different data sense making strategies in their classroom. And so much of what you see here this evening is work that we've completed alongside this group of 19 middle school science teachers this past June. So I'm actively taking their feedback and revising these lessons. They're in the process of implementing various data puzzle lessons, and we're hearing from them what works, what doesn't work, and again, continuing to update lessons as needed. So really want to acknowledge these folks and all of you here tonight, because it's you that make these resources what they are. I should add, and I didn't earlier, probably because this is the first time I'm doing this, but Dr. Megan DeMarche, one of those earth scientists, actually a biologist, is going to be joining us this evening. And so our approach here is this: we're going to engage with a strategy in the context of one of Dr. Megan DeMarche's data sets, and that's the data set that's featured in the lesson that we'll kind of look at tonight. We'll go through the strategy, look at that data set, and then the last 25, 30 minutes, Dr. DeMarche will join us and provide some even greater context to the data set that we're looking at, how she pictured here, how she went about setting up her investigation, a little bit more about the data collection, the analysis, some of the different data sense making strategies and processes that she herself went through in analyzing the data set. So that's the scoop. The data puzzles instructional framework. Just want to point this out. I know some of you are familiar with it. Some of you peeked at it before you hopped on tonight. Some of you, maybe this is the first time you're seeing this. Basically, this is the ambitious science. These are the ambitious science teaching practices presented in a format and a structure that is like ready to be used. Ambitious science teaching practices. These are equitable practices to support students make sense of different phenomena, and their different strategies and skills that teachers can use to create their own lessons. But we've done that work for you. So each data puzzle lesson has these 4 parts, and each part within these parts, there are these different kind of tasks that are outlined here in the chalkboard. So all lessons start out by eliciting students' ideas. You can kind of think of that as a diagnostic assessment. What are students already bringing to their classroom that might be relevant to the data puzzle lesson that you'll give them thereafter? So there's an opening scenario, and through discussions or whiteboard activities or a warm-up prompt, students are asked to think about what they've experienced, use their language, their ideas to make sense of this phenomena. And after we elicit students' ideas, we present this other science investigation that has similarities to the opening scenario. It's like, you've experienced this, you know all this, you know this, and this, and this is a scientist at Ceres, the University of Colorado Boulder, who's studying something similar. And through this identifying important science ideas, we connect student resources to a new scenario, a science investigation. We do that through an interactive reading called a puzzle plot. So there are visuals, videos, other things in this interactive reading. Students summarize big ideas by developing some initial models, and then they make predictions about a question that's presented in the text. Here's where we're doing a lot of our revamping. So after their prediction, they can test their prediction, test their ideas against an authentic data set. So here's where we're spending a lot more time integrating different data sense making practices. So different strategies to get students doing different things in order to build skills. So this is where we'll spend the majority of the time this evening. So we've got revealing resources, getting some context for the data, making a prediction about a question, analyzing and interpreting a data set to test their prediction. And then they construct a final model at the end to kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together. So there's different data strategies. The data is heavily contextualized. There's some model construction. So each lesson follows this same instructional framework. And again, tonight, we're going to really just zero in on some of the strategies that are a part of this quadrant here, the analyzing and interpreting data sets. What even is data sense making? It's not In the literature, there are words that we throw around all the time. Our team has defined it as the exploration, analysis, and interpretation completed to investigate a science phenomena. And so we're thinking about what practices do students need to build, what skills do students need to build in order to make sense of data? And this is where Kristen Hunter-Thompson and Annette Brickley have really dug in to the literature, and they've spent much of the last year pulling the science and engineering practices apart into practices that are more specific to data sense making. So science and engineering practice 4 is analyzing and interpreting data, but what Kristen and Annette have done is they've done a lot of thinking about how do we set students up for success when analyzing a data set? What does it even mean to analyze a data set? And how do we support students interpreting this data set in context? How are they drawing their conclusions? And so really digging into what this means, analyzing and interpreting data, and what we want students to be doing when they're engaging with this practice. And so we want students describing visual patterns and interpreting those patterns in context. And like I said, these data puzzle lessons are heavily contextualized. To build these skills in the context of these data sense making practices, however, we data puzzlers are thinking about what strategies can we use? What strategies can we use to build these skills around data sense making practices? What I'm not showing here is we have built out it's a real royal we. Kristen and Annette have built out a much more detailed table that I'm not showing here. And data puzzles were specifically focused on 4 science and engineering practices and have defined a series of data sense making practices to kind of build upon those 4 science and engineering practices. So we're not targeting all of them in these resources, just a few. What does this look like? Well, for us, when we're looking at a data set, we're thinking about the context of the data. What do we want students to get out of the data? And for each of these lessons, one of the first things we're after is getting them to describe a visual pattern, describe visual patterns in the data set. And so once we've identified that skill we want to build, we want to think about what strategy will we use, can teachers use to support them in getting at that skill, give them some practice. And so tonight, one of the strategies we'll look at is the slow reveal strategy. And so what we're trying to do is get students to focus on different parts of the data set at different times. So we've got our data sense making practice. Here's our strategy that we're going to use to kind of build those skills. And when we are enacting those strategies, we're getting students to enact certain moves, data moves or actions. So through this slow reveal strategy, we're asking students to actively highlight features of the data as new parts of the data visualization are revealed. And with that, what we hope that is doing is that's giving students an opportunity to build the ability to analyze these different parts and to visualize the overall patterns as these different subparts are revealed. So we're not totally sure this is data set to data set, right? Whatever we're hoping students to kind of guide students to reveal the big science idea we want students to get at from the data set. We think about the strategy that might support them to do certain things with the data set, all in service of building those skills around data sense making practices. So we'll kind of think about this tonight, this progression when we are engaging with the slow reveal. Hopefully your work, the slow reveal strategy will get you to thinking about different parts of the data set where I'm highlighting different features, all in service of this describing visual patterns. So all that is the background for this tipping point lesson. Again, it's on our data puzzle website. It's about 180 plus minutes of instruction to get through it. What you're looking at here is the puzzle plot, this interactive text. That's kind of part 2 of a data puzzle lesson. And I'm just going to summarize some of the big ideas, the takeaways from that background text, that interactive reading. This lesson is all about an alpine tundra plant called moss campion that's adapted to cold mountain and Arctic areas with no trees. It's a cushion plant, so it grows in that cushion shape on the ground, low to the ground. It has a long taproot to access water, and it's a nursery plant, so it provides a habitat for other plants to grow in. It's slow growing. These are really long-lived plants. They live for hundreds of years, and they live across a broad latitudinal range, from Alaska all the way down south to New Mexico. And so over here, Dan Doak, Megan DeMarche, and Bill Morris from CU Boulder, University of Georgia, and Duke University have been traveling to different field sites across this latitudinal range, investigating the vital signs of this plant, Moss campion. They've been doing this for more than 20 years, so we've got a really long-term data set from different plants across this latitudinal range, and they're trying to see how the plant is responding to different environmental conditions. Kind of picture over here, they'll measure the size of the plant, looking at the area, can count the number of fruits, these little red kind of these little fruits that hold seeds. They've got these plants tagged at these different sites so they can go back year to year and see what's changed with the plants and look at how they might be responding to environmental changes. And one of the things they've noticed at these plants is that there can be a big change in fruit production year to year. It's really hard to see. You can see here in 2004, that's pretty clear. You can see these different fruit pods. There are about 8 seeds in each of these fruit pods. Rather than try to count the individual seeds, they just count the fruits year to year. And so just an example, in 2003, we're looking at the same plant over the course of a 3-year period. They counted 4 fruits on this plant. The following year, 18 fruits, and then in 2005, 0 fruits. And what I'm going to ask you to do in the chat is post some ideas. What do you think the scientists could measure to investigate this question here? What could be affecting moss campion reproduction? Right, we've got this empirical observation here. We can see the number of fruits just changed year to year. And so in the chat, I'm wondering, looking for a few ideas, what do you think these scientists could measure to investigate what's affecting moss campion reproduction? Temperature, right? And that could be, a lot of different things: seasonal temperature, annual temperature, nutrients, moisture, human impact, totally. The density of the plants, right? Precipitation, when you're thinking about in mountains and high latitudes, you can have rain, you can have snow, you can have ice. What's the moisture look like? When does it come? Animal impacts, the date of snow melt. Interesting. Fungi, different relationships with other organisms. So lots of different things that could be causing the change in moss campion reproduction, right? Lots of different environmental conditions. And so we're gonna kind of test those predictions. We're gonna, we're gonna look at some of these environmental conditions. Now, we're not gonna look at all these environmental conditions here tonight. Right? We're gonna kind of pick the one that Dr. DeMarche and her team found to have the most impact on moss campion reproduction. But in this data set look is a combining the reproduction rate data from plants across each of these sites. So all of these plants that they've measured the reproduction rates at Latier Ridge, Niwot Ridge, and the Wrangell Mountains Toolik Lake. They've combined that into a data set. And again, they're looking at the reproduction rate. So the number of fruits that are growing on these plants each year. And so we're going to look at some data here, and we won't use the chat here. We'll just kind of ask you to think about this using the slow reveal strategy. And many of you might be familiar with this. We're going to sequentially build out parts of the data visualization. So we're going to show you one part, ask you to think about it. In our classrooms, we might have a discussion about this or have students take a few notes and then do a think, pair, share. We're building and revising meeting as we reveal more of the visualization and gather more information. So what you do is you strip all context from the data visualization, take away axes, labels, annotations, and discuss what the data are about and what they think it means. And then we'll continue to add these elements back over time. And again, for us here tonight, I'm specifically adding different parts back to get you to look at different features, all in service of describing visual patterns. So this is from the slide deck, all data puzzle lessons. This tipping point lesson comes with a student worksheet, a slide deck, a teacher guide, answer key. We ask you, your students, to think about what you notice, what you wonder, thinking back to the environmental factors that you just listed. Like what could we be looking at here? And then we reveal another part of the graph. We just learned that the y-axis is representing the reproduction rate. For us, we might be looking at the units, the number of fruits per year by the area of the plant. So we knew that this was a reproduction rate data set, but we didn't know what environmental factor might be represented, how it might be represented. So now, we would do this differently in our classroom, of course, or if we were together in a room, we would be talking about this. We'd be talking about the fact that we just learned that the x-axis was average July temperature. You might start to be seeing, looking at these different temperature ranges, the size of the bars. You might notice that there's a higher temperature range here, a higher temperature band that's not represented in what we'll ask you to do and what your students do. Just think about, based on what we're showing here, what we're revealing, what would you predict the reproduction rate would be in this 16 to 17.9 degree Celsius, not Fahrenheit, temperature range? What would you predict this bar would look like? And after having students engage in this kind of prediction, they're looking at a pattern that they see, we'd reveal that last bar and see that, in fact, at the highest temperature range, reproduction rates for moss campion plants are actually the lowest. And so through this, we're hoping we're building out students' familiarization with the data set by revealing different subparts, revealing different patterns. There was a pattern, this increasing pattern, and then there was this abrupt change at the end. And so students are grappling with these changes. And why did we use slow reveal here? Well, again, this is just one part of the data sense making process. This is done through whole class discussion prior to students actually answering a few questions to make sense of this for themselves. We chose this slow reveal because the shape of the graph is critical to the science idea we're trying to convey. We're trying to convey that moss campion reproductions increase with increasing average July temperatures up to a certain temperature, and that's the tipping point. That's where the name for this lesson has come from. Beyond that tipping point temperature, reproduction rates dramatically decline. And so the slow reveal move was key in getting users, hopefully yourself, to see that pattern, this increase to a point and then this dramatic decline. So again, the goal here was to use slow reveal to get students to highlight different parts of the data set, all in service of building that skill to describe visual patterns. In the lesson as written, after facilitating that sort of discussion, that experience with students, highlighting different features, that's when students would then go to the student worksheet themselves. The data set is fully revealed to them on the student worksheet. So you wouldn't want to give them the worksheet before you enact that slow reveal with them, right? That would kind of ruin the surprise. But there are a series of questions, and the goal for these questions is to support students interpret the patterns that they see here in the context of the overall lesson. And to do that, we're using the support or refute strategy. We had some disagreement on our team whether we should call this the evidence for or evidence against strategy. Really minor differences between the two. Ultimately, support or refute strategy where students are articulating evidence to support or refute a claim. And it gets students to think about what the data are actually showing them. And it's kind of a fun game. They're trying to solve a mystery. They're looking for evidence in a data set to support or refute two different claims or two different predictions that are presented to them. And it challenges them to kind of think about 2 points of view and pulls those 2 points of view apart in order to draw a conclusion at the end. And so we'll see what that looks like here in the student worksheet. So again, after engaging students with that slow reveal to get at the data sense making practice of describe visual patterns, we're going to use this support or refute strategy to get students to interpret these patterns in context. And so students are given 2 different predictions. If you look at the student worksheet on your own time, you'll see that these predictions were given to students even before the slow reveal strategy, and they had to choose one of these predictions. And then after having seen the data set, they're going to look at these same predictions that were presented to them earlier and try to find evidence to support the prediction and evidence to refute or go against the prediction. So we think about this, moss campion reproduction is highest in summers with higher temperatures. And so this prediction, the evidence supporting that prediction this holds up. Moss campion reproduction rates are getting higher with higher summer temperatures, but they're not actually highest at the highest temperature range. In the highest temperature range, actually reproduction rates are the lowest. So we've got some evidence to support that. We do see that reproduction rates increase with higher temperatures, but the highest reproduction rate is not at the highest summer temperature range. If we think about it down here, moss campion reproduction is lower in summers with lower temperatures. That holds up a little bit. We could say, yeah, there are reproduction rates are low at lower temperature ranges, but they're lowest at the highest temperature range. So we've got these 2 predictions. There's evidence that supports these predictions, kind of, and evidence that refutes these predictions, kind of. And so after engaging with this table, this strategy, support, refute, we ask students to think about the pattern that they see and then make a claim for their own, essentially make a revised prediction on their own that combines these 2 predictions that aren't exactly correct into one for themselves. Ultimately, we want to highlight this pattern, this tipping point, this bell curve pattern, again, in the context of what is happening with moss campion plants at these different temperature ranges. So thanks for sticking with me here. Basically, we're trying to, again, we're digging into that one quadrant. We've got the slow reveal and the support refute, two different strategies, two different goals. Um, and after engaging with those strategies and hopefully students really being able to make sense of those data in context, we try to take the story and help students produce a visual to represent that story by constructing a model. So here's some different examples of student work. Basically, they have this background information and they annotate upon it. So they have different Moss-Campion seeds or fruits, and they show that at low temperature range, there are fewer seeds, fewer fruits. In the middle, they have the most seeds, kind of the temperature bands in the middle, and at the highest temperature range, they have the fewest seeds. So taking the data set and representing it in a visual way by constructing a final model. We didn't do all of those things clearly this evening, but I wanted to just kind of show you what we talked about in the context of the instructional framework. There's some opening scenario. The opening scenario, we asked students to consider what doctors would measure if you took a plant to the doctor. What would a plant doctor try to study? And then we introduce the plant doctors, Dr. Megan DeMarche, who just arrived, and provide a little bit of context about their research through a puzzle plot text. Then through the slow reveal strategy and that support refute strategy, we get students to describe visual patterns and interpret the data sets in the context of this investigation. And then the final piece of the puzzle is to construct this visual model. So these are the different elements of a data puzzle lesson and how they show up. And what we're really leaning into this year, again, is this third quadrant here, trying to integrate different strategies that get students building skills in those different data sense making practices. Sarah, yeah, we talked about that. Sorry, some of these questions. They are the predictions are very similar. There's subtle differences. The language we use is like higher or highest. Um, so highest summers, higher temperatures. We were wondering if students would pick up on that. Um, and think if this is happening, this is just the reverse of that. So we'll see. But thanks for pointing that out, and we may need to change the wording on that if it's problematic. And I see that Megan is responding to Amy, and yeah, thanks Amy for that question, and we'll have Megan speak a little bit more to her work and be available to questions. Before I turn it over to Megan, are there other questions about these strategies? Um, these are not meant to be lessons that are just given to students and ask them to complete the student worksheet. The slide decks, student worksheets, we bounce kind of back and forth between the two. These are really collaborative learning experiences. We've seen the most success with teachers that use public records. They're using whiteboards to jot down student ideas. I know Randy Hoff here plays Jenga with his students to kind of represent the tipping point idea before starting this investigation. And then again, you can see in this slow reveal lots of different discourse back and forth with students sharing what they notice, what they wonder, how things are being represented, so on and so forth. So that being said, Megan, thanks so much for being here. Megan's an assistant professor of plant biology at the University of Georgia, and she explores ecology and evolution of wild plant populations with an emphasis on their responses to climate change. Been really lucky to have been able to get to know and work with Megan for the last few years. And I'm really excited for her to offer a little bit more context around her work and the data set that you just saw. Megan, would you like to share your green, turn it over to you. Make sure I enabled that for you.
How's that? Are you all seeing a slide deck? I'm
We we got you.
trying to remember back to the days of teaching on Zoom. I've already lost everything. Um, Thank you so much for inviting me here. I'm really excited that there's such great turnout and, you know, interest in using these data in classrooms. And so today my goal is just to provide a little bit more background on the project and how we collect the data, and then leave time for any questions you all might have. So to start off, here's a picture of a beautiful moss campion plant in Colorado, just to give a sense of uh, kind of the biggest that these plants get. And the most fruits we'll ever get will sometimes be in the hundreds, but typically they're quite a bit smaller than this. All right, so I wanted to start off by just thinking really broadly about tundra and tundra plants and why we might be interested in this ecosystem, why we might care. So to define tundra, this is a biome that is too cold and the growing seasons are too short for trees. So from a bird's eye view, it can look like a very barren landscape, but when you get close down, you see that there are actually quite a few plants and animals able to make a living in the tundra environment. And we can define tundra as a biome, but we find it in sort of two general types of places. The first is Arctic tundra, which we find in very high latitudes in the northern hemisphere. This is in the Arctic Circle areas in Russia, Greenland, Arctic Alaska, where we work. But we also find the same type of biome at very high elevations, where we're sort of at a higher elevation than trees are able to survive. So above tree line. And so we find this in the Rocky Mountains, in the Andes, and the Himalayas, all around the world. And so we can think of both of these as being tundra, but Arctic and alpine tundra can be different in some important ways. So this is a picture of Arctic tundra at one of our populations of moss campion that we study and we visit every year. This is in Arctic Alaska. And you can see, you know, it's a classic tundra environment. There's not a tree for as far as the eye can see. But this is an environment in the Arctic where we have a quite short growing season, usually just about 2 months or so. And there's a layer of soil that is permanently frozen. There's permafrost here under the ground, and that prevents water from really filtering through it and draining, and it can lead to bogs and ponds and just kind of wet, marshy vegetation. If you look closely, you'll also notice that you don't see a whole lot of bare ground or rock here. This is a pretty thickly vegetated environment where moss campion is growing within a thick layer of mosses and lichens. And that's in pretty stark contrast to alpine tundra, what we find at the tops of mountains. So these are at very high elevations above tree line. Here's a picture of one of our populations at Niwot Ridge, which is a research station in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. And here we have a longer growing season, usually around 4 months or so. The soil is fairly rocky or gravelly with pretty good water drainage. And because these alpine environments are at higher elevations, but lower latitudes, we often see much warmer maximum temperatures during the day, but we can also actually see colder temperatures at night during the summer because they're high elevation, the air is really thin. So we could talk about tundra generally, but just to make the point that the alpine and Arctic tundra do differ in some important ways. And these landscapes, as I said, they might look sort of barren until you really get down on your hands and knees and look closely. There are a wide variety of plants that have adapted to thrive in these very cold, harsh environments. But one thing that really defines them is that they stay low to the ground. And this is something that we see in all kinds of wildflowers that are very distantly related to each other. We see this convergent evolution of a very compact, low to the ground life form. And so we call these cushion plants because they almost look like little pin cushions. And so these are a couple examples of a forget-me-not. Of course, our main heroine of the story here, moss campion, phlox. These are all species that, while they're close relatives at lower elevations or lower latitudes, might look like a typical flower. These species have adapted to the tundra environment by staying very low to the ground and growing outward rather than up. And this provides an important benefit in these cold environments because by staying low to the ground, not only do you avoid that wind chill, it also means that these plants can be completely covered by snow in the winter, and that provides a really important insulation because air temperatures can drop much lower than freezing, and snow will keep these plants just right at the freezing point. All right, so what makes moss campion specifically interesting? Not only is it just adorable, which I think this picture proves, I just enjoy going out and finding it every year. But it also is incredibly long-lived. It can live for hundreds of years. And in fact, geologists will often use this species to date geological features because we know it grows at an incredibly slow rate. We can use kind of the biggest moss campion plants we can find in an area as an estimate of how old that ground must have been exposed. That allows us to date, glacial retreats, for example. It also has interesting adaptations to survive the extreme cold, including making antifreeze compounds in its leaf tissue. And perhaps most importantly, it's what we call a nurse plant, meaning that by growing in this cushion form, it creates this very nice micro environment for a lot of other species. So this bottom picture is a little grainy, but you can see quite a few other wildflower species growing in the middle of a moss campion cushion. And we've also found this for insects, and even microbial diversity is higher around moss campion plants than nearby. All right, so this project really got started by my collaborators, Dan Doak and Bill Morris. In this top picture, they started working with this species in 1995 when I was still in grade school. And here they are in the top picture toasting the 10-year anniversary of data collection in 2005. And then I started working in this system in 2015, and we actually just celebrated another anniversary here in 2025. So this has been going on for quite a while. But I wanted to take a moment to talk about science as an ongoing process. I think we often think, you have a question, a hypothesis, an experiment, you get an answer, and you're done. But in lots of branches of science, that's not the case. Every answer just leads to more questions. And so Bill and Dan here originally started studying moss campion because they just wanted to know how a plant can grow across such a wide geographic range. And so they wanted to compare what is this plant doing in New Mexico versus Alaska, and can that help us understand how some plants can be incredibly widespread and common? But over time, that question has evolved. And oh, that's my next slide. I'll get to that in a second. So what do we do? So Dan and Bill originally set up populations in Alaska, Colorado, and New Mexico that span the species' entire latitudinal range in North America. And they marked individual plants with known ID tags. You can sort of see in this picture here, this is plant number 302. And because these plants live for hundreds of years, many of the plants that were initially marked in 1995 are still around, and we're still studying them. And so we have these permanently marked plants. We have mapped their position according to these permanent transects that we've set up. So they each have an X and Y coordinate in a grid system. They have a unique marker. So we're able to relocate the same plants every single year. And we record these core vital rates that you all have heard a lot about. And the first is just survival. Is that plant still alive? That's a simple yes or no. We're interested in how quickly it's growing. And so to do that, we measure its size every year. But then, of course, the key to a population being sustainable over the long term is its ability to reproduce. So we also want to know something about its reproduction. And so to do this, we count how many fruits with seeds inside it's able to make every year. And because that is really correlated with just how big the plant is, we scale that by plant size to get a measure of reproductive rate. And we also monitor the climate conditions at all of these sites and in each year. I mentioned over time, kind of our main questions in this system have been evolving to be much more related to this idea of climate change and how is climate change impacting this species. And that's because we have observed the climate changing really rapidly at these sites and having strong impacts on these populations. And so climate change is particularly challenging for Arctic and alpine communities if we just look at the observed change in temperature since 1990, which is about when our study started, to 2020. The largest amount of warming has tended to happen at northern latitudes and at high elevations. And this means that climate is changing really, really rapidly in Arctic and alpine ecosystems. And these are species that are already occurring at very high latitudes or at the tops of mountains. And so there isn't really any place for them to go where it will be colder if the places where they currently are become too warm. To add to that challenge, many of these species live for a long time, making it hard for them to move or evolve quickly. And many of them are adapted for extreme cold conditions, so it's not clear how they might react to warming temperatures. So I wanted to just quickly show some pictures of the different places where we have studied moss campion to give a sense of just how different these environments are. So our farthest north site is this Toolik Lake Field Station. This is an Arctic research station in northern Alaska. And because it really is in the middle of nowhere, it's like a 9-hour drive on a gravel road from Fairbanks. There's an excellent research station here because all the researchers here are just completely dependent on this research station for everything. And so, this is a little plug for the importance of maintaining these types of research facilities that allow scientists to access places that they may not have been able to do otherwise. Farther south in southeast Alaska, we have populations in Wrangell St. Elias National Park. This is very rural, rugged area with almost no infrastructure. And so to access these populations, we're backpacking in every summer. And I'm showing a picture here. You can see our tents down in this sort of valley. And this picture is taken from where we cook and eat. So that's as far away from our sleeping area that we feel like we can have food and be grizzly safe when we're in this area of the country. And I am not a morning person, and so having to hike up a hill to get a cup of coffee is always the worst part of this project for me, but then this view makes up for it. And then farther south, we have sites in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. This is at the Niwot Ridge Reserve, which is a really active research site for a lot of folks studying alpine tundra in the Colorado area. These sites are at much higher elevation. And then our farthest south populations are in northern New Mexico. And this is as far south as this species is able to survive, and it's surviving at very high elevations in these mountains, so about 3,800 meters above sea level. And as you can see, this is much kind of hotter and even drier tundra environment than the other sites. So those are the places that we go every year, but what do we do? I thought I would sort of walk you through some of this data collection and show you a scan of a data sheet that we filled out just this last year. And so I'm using this picture of a moss campion plant here that's in some of the materials, and I thought we could talk through some of these vital rates. So if we come across this individual plant, the first thing we're going to ask is, has it survived since the previous year, yes or no? So I would say yes. Here, what we're looking for with survival is just, do we see green tissue on this plant still? So this plant has survived. And these plants are very long lives. They have a fairly high survival rate. And the next thing we want to do is characterize its size. And the way we do this is a little bit old school. It's really just with a ruler. And so the first thing we do is we measure the length of the longest axis. So I drew an orange line here as an example. We would measure that in millimeters. And on this data sheet here, that's what we would call this A1 measurement. So you can see, we have some plants that are 400 millimeters in their longest axis and others that are quite a bit smaller. Once we've done that, we're going to measure the longest perpendicular axis. So I threw up an example here. That would be our A2 measurement. And then what we're going to do is think about an ellipse that would be defined by those two axes and try to get a visual estimate of how much we think is missing from that ellipse, because these plants are not always perfectly round. Sometimes they have chunks of tissue missing, and this is the most subjective measurement. So I thought I would ask you, if you take a second, if this is our ellipse, maybe think to yourself, if you had to estimate what percentage of the area of this ellipse is not made up of healthy green moss campion tissue, what number might you come up with? Is anyone brave and want to hazard a guess? All right, well, that's fair enough. This is very subjective. And so if I were looking at this, I might think, well, there's some tissue here outside of this ellipse that I want to account for, but then there's also some that's missing here and some dye back here. And so I might think maybe about 15% would be missing. And so that's the other estimate we do. And then the final thing is we count the number of fruits. And that in this case are these little brown capsules, and this plant has 18. And so it's very low tech. That's what we're doing for every plant, but we're doing it for thousands of plants every year. And that allows us to look at these trends in vital rates. Okay, so what have we learned over time? This example is in the materials, but something that's really striking just for this one plant in 3 subsequent years is how much its reproduction can change from year to year. You know, I mentioned it's growing very slowly and it has a high survival rate, so we're not seeing, obviously it's alive in all 3 of these years. We're not seeing big differences in how big it is, but we are seeing big differences in its reproduction. And so we're very curious in what might be explaining that. And so one of the things we're doing is collecting data on temperature and climate in these sites. And this is just an example of what that temperature data looks like for one of our sites in one of our years. And you can see this window of time when it's covered by a protective layer of snow. So there's not much day-night change in the temperature, and its temperatures are very close to zero. And so that allows us to figure out when the snow melts. And then we can also look at how warm it is during the growing season, and particularly in July. And one of the really striking patterns that we've uncovered is this idea of a tipping point. And I think in advance, this was very surprising to us. I think we were sort of thinking these are very cold adapted species. Probably warmer temperatures will decrease reproduction. Or alternatively, you could argue that because they're in such harsh, cold environments, maybe they're at sort of the limit of what they can tolerate in terms of cold, and having it be a little bit warmer will just be a little beneficial. And as we uncovered this idea of a tipping point, I think we realized, oh, probably both of those are true. And so we think that's what's sort of happening at these different temperature ranges, where there is a benefit to some degree of warming, but only up to a point, at which point reproduction really falls off a cliff, which is the thing that I found most striking. And I just wanted to share when we look at this with regards to the timing of snow melt instead of the temperature in July, we see a very similar pattern. So this is the day that the snow melted. So lower values would mean earlier snow melt in the year. So a warmer spring with less snowpack. And we see this similar kind of curve where earlier snow melt seems to increase reproduction to a point, but then reproduction begins to decrease with even earlier snow melt. And the reason why I wanted to show this graph is that we're seeing some really striking years in New Mexico in particular, where the snow is melting very early in the year, and basically none of the plants are able to reproduce at all. And so going back to this idea of science as this continually ongoing process, you know, we've uncovered these tipping points with respect to climate. And the next question is why? What exactly is it about really warm temperatures that is causing reproduction to decrease dramatically? And so we're still working on figuring this out. There are a couple explanations. It could just simply be heat stress, but it could also be that in really warm springs, these plants start to flower earlier, and they might be more vulnerable to late season frosts or sudden hailstorms. It could be that warm temperatures are affecting the pollinators and not the plants directly necessarily, but something is happening to disrupt their pollination. And then another next step that we're following up on is another wrinkle to moss campion that I haven't mentioned yet is that plants in this species actually have two sexes. And so some individuals have hermaphrodite flowers, and that's what we think of as a typical flower, meaning that they make seeds and pollen. But there are some plants that are female, so they only make seeds and they don't make any pollen. And some things that we know at this point is that female plants usually make more fruits. We think that's because they don't have to make pollens, they can invest more resources into making seeds. Female plants are more common in colder areas, which is why we are hypothesizing that they may have a slightly different temperature response, perhaps, than hermaphrodite plants, and might be maybe even more vulnerable to those warming temperatures. And because female plants do not make any pollen, they require good pollination and they require hermaphrodite plants to be around in the area to be able to provide pollen to them. So I have a graduate student right now who is really diving into this question, and hopefully we'll have even more information on that over the next few years. Okay, I think I went over, so I'm going to stop talking at this point, but thank you all so much for your interest in this project.
Thanks so much, Megan. And you went over because I went over. So I apologize. Folks that have to go, we're at time. Please, if you haven't already done so, if you want a PD certificate, add your name to the form that I added in the chat. If you would like to stay around and ask questions, Megan and I are happy to hang out. Megan, so bye. Thanks for being here. I hope to see you at a future event. If you gotta go, if you'd like to stay on and ask some questions, please do that. Megan, one question that came up. Could you share the species names of some of the other flowers or insects that use that moss campion that grow inside that microclimate?
Oh, yes. Not the microbes that is outside of my wheelhouse. But I
Yeah.
would be happy, I should say, I'll put my email address in the chat. I have had a few teachers reach out about that question in particular, and there are some papers and some graphs and things on that that I could share. But like a GM, which is like mountain avens, is one that we commonly find in there. There are a couple grass species, like festuca species that will grow in the cushion plant. Old Man of the Mountain is one of the favorite like wildflowers, like this big sunflower that you might find in the alpine that's commonly growing out of moss campion as well.
Great, great. So folks want to hang and ask questions, please do. If for the rest of you, I'm going to send out this recording. We'll get Megan's slides sent out to you as well as the slide deck that I spoke to this evening. So we'll have some kind of a record of this event and information related to the strategies and the context, the actual science investigation that Megan is actively a part of. That she spoke to this evening. So hopefully those two perspectives are of interest to you, and we really appreciate you being here this evening after a day in the classroom. It means a lot. Don't hesitate to reach out to Megan or myself. I'll also add our emails to that follow-up email that you'll get tomorrow. And yeah, hope to get to see you again soon. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Randy.
Sorry, my video's not working, but
That's all right.
yeah.
I remember what you look like. You look
The big mustache. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm jealous.
No, it's been good. I do have one quick question before
Yeah,
it's going back to, I forget who asked the question about the contrasting versus similar predictions. Can you, I mean, are you prepared to delve into
yeah,
that a little more? Why you made them basically the opposite side of the coin instead of opposite questions? Um,
yeah. Let's
just
look
like
at that.
what would happen if it went higher versus um, lower temperature in the summer?
Yeah, let's see. So we were trying to come up with two claims, two predictions that if students were looking at this graph, that they would again be able to provide evidence that would support or refute it. And so, what are our two? They think moss campion reproduction is highest in summer with higher temperatures. And so we wanted this again, we're making claims or predictions that there is evidence for or against. So we went with that language. The highest reproduction is
Oh,
highest in
okay.
summer with higher
Okay.
temperatures. And so
So
it's highest at higher summer temperatures, but at the highest summer temperature, reproduction rates are actually the lowest. So it, I wonder we have not tested this in a classroom yet, what this nuanced language how that might add confusion or not. And the opposite here, reproduction rate is lower in summers with lower summer temperatures. And so that's kind of true,
oh yeah,
but not totally true.
I see that.
So
Mhm.
we're trying to provide predictions, claims that there is some evidence to support and some evidence that refutes. Um, in talking with Kristen Hunter Thompson and Annette, who helped kind of revise this, um, what we're trying to do is to get students to think about those two, the supporting evidence for both, and then create their own claim at the end.
So each of those is looking kind of like at the opposite ends of the graph, right? Is that my
Mhm,
understanding? On the highest with highest temperatures, lowest with lowest temperatures,
mhm.
as opposed
And
to
then,
highest with highest temperatures and lowest with highest temperatures.
mhm, mhm.
S-
And both are
Okay.
trying to get them to key in here, I guess.
Yeah, so okay.
If you change that, I'd be really interested, Randy, and see if you were to try this and change the wording. I'd be really interested to see what you go with.
Yeah,
We're gonna try it out a couple times this year with the middle school teachers in the Front Range.
really. Okay. Yeah.
Hmm.
So Megan Chason was on here. She's the one who asked the question about the different plants growing within the nursery plant. So she's my co-teacher, and so we'll talk about it together and see. We don't do it until the spring, but yeah, it'd be I'll have to look at that and see which one of those uh, prediction scenarios works best. But I like it. I really like the contrasting predictions and making arguments for and against each. It's just that I mean, I still got to process it a bit.
And you have you been doing have you all been using this lesson
Yeah,
for
we've
the
used
last
it
few
now
years?
3 years, I believe.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, we love it.
So you've probably made it your own at this you're probably like,
Yeah, we've
John, why do you keep messing with this? This works for us.
yeah, that's true. No, we've modified it a bit, but I do really like the slow reveal. We haven't used it that we haven't done that, so I like that a lot better than them just looking at the full graph with all the detail.
Yeah.
Mm, So
Yeah, it's exciting to get to work with some of these other folks, Randy, and see these different strategies that they're thinking of,
yeah,
and they're really thoughtful about what the strategy gets students to do, what the moves students are doing when you're enacting the strategy, and why those moves are important.
Yeah,
So it's been an interesting last year learning more from folks that do education research and focus on data skills.
cool. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's been so
Well,
good. It's good to see you again.
yeah, you too, Randy. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. And thank you, Megan. We'll
Thank
see you
And
in the next webinar.
yeah, sounds great.
Next time you do
Hey,
this.
hey, Megan. I
Mhm.
was wondering, see, Randy,